Welcome to another edition of Grace Under Pressure, where my guest today is Constance Dierickx. I will tell you all about Constance in just a moment. Grace Under Pressure is that show that deals with what's often dismissed as the soft stuff, the caring, the commitment we exert toward others. And when you do it from a leadership perspective, as you will definitely discover that Constance is, you do it with a common cause of bringing people together. Constance Dierickx, welcome to Grace Under Pressure.
Thank you, John. I am thrilled to be here, and I really enjoyed the music at the intro. I was sort of,
Well, it gets you in the mood. I want to tell folks all about you. Constance Dierickx is a long sought after advisor to boards and senior executives in high stakes leadership situations that she's going to tell you all about. Her newest book, and the reason that she's here today, is to talk about meta leadership. See what others don't and make great decisions. Constance has coached and consulted with dozens of boards and 500 executives in many different countries, many different companies. Her companies that she's worked with have done well financially, but also created better workplaces. She's an expert in governance and executive leadership and has been featured on, you name it, National Public Radio, Marketplace Morning, Wall Street Journal, Harvard Business Review, on and on and on. And I like a term. One of her clients named her the decision doctor. So we'll explore that. Constance Dierickx, it's a pleasure to have you on the show. Welcome.
Thank you, John. I'm delighted to be speaking with you.
Well, great. So you have your new book is Meta Leadership. I know what a metaphor is. What is meta leadership?
Metaphor. Yeah, I love those too. So meta, the prefix meta, means above or beyond. So for the academics in your audience, we are familiar with meta-analysis, where you're taking an overarching look at a particular set of research studies, and you're analyzing the data. Metaphysics is thought by some to be a little more woo-woo. It's what's beyond the understanding of physics. So when I was thinking about this book and what am I trying to say with this book, I'm trying to say to leaders, there's a lot of great advice out there about how to do this or how to do that. And there's 58 gazillion ways to do strategy and all of that. And there's a lot of great stuff. But I wanted to say to leaders, what is really going to make the greatest difference for you is if you can come up above and look at things holistically. And so I created a model and wrote about it and have just a number of terrific examples of admirable leaders that I've either known personally or have read about.
I like that idea. I've always thought of management as the practice of looking down, and I don't mean that dismissively, but minding the store. Sure. And leadership is looking up aspirationally. So your idea of meta as above dovetails with that type of thinking. Now you have something which is central to the book, and it's dichotomous leadership. I know what a hippopotamus is, but I don't know what dichotomous leadership is.
Dichotomous thinking is what I talk about in the book. And the reason that I talk about dichotomous thinking, which just means black and white thinking, this person is either great or they're awful. This flavor of ice cream is the most delicious and that one is awful. Or,
that's how my grandchildren focus on things.
Exactly right. Yeah, mine too. Or it's this marketplace is bad or this type of customer is bad. And it's a shortcut. So the book is organized into 3 sections, and each section has 3 chapters which explore a particular dichotomy. And what my message is that when we dichotomize, it helps us speed up our judgments. It's very useful. If a taxi cab is coming toward you, barreling down the road, you don't be meta, jump out of the way. That's dichotomous. Like, that's bad. This is dangerous. Yeah. And it's a very useful aspect of human evolution that we can make these rapid judgments. They sometimes keep us safe. But for leaders, there's often more time. to make decisions. And when we rely on these shortcuts, if you're familiar, I'm sure you are, John, with Kahneman and Tversky's work, that these cognitive errors happen often because we're using shortcuts and habits of thinking. Those can be fine. If you're choosing ice cream, I don't want to be behind you in line if you're going to get all analytical about it.
Right.
Take a flavor, move on. Yeah.
Constance, you are so wise to explore this because I don't know if you've ever noticed, but senior leaders are really, really busy. And they're always looking for shortcuts, not because of, just to get through the day. But I've always believed in the art of deliberative thinking. So that's what you're focusing on. And so it's good. So I'm a senior executive. You're my coach. And you say, I want you to be deliberative or dichotomous and do all, and then I'll say,
or not dichotomous.
I have no idea. You have no idea what my schedule is. What are you going to say? So.
I'm going to say that that the way to use meta leadership, which has three central aspects to it. The first is thinking, metacognition. The second is emotion, using emotion intentionally. And the third is being aware of your own habits of behavior and those around you. So a lot of meta leadership is about dealing with exactly what you just said. It's this onslaught of information and people. Some people are even trying to pull the wool over your eyes. So
no, that would never happen.
Yeah, they do. Or maybe they're not intentionally trying to pull the wool over your eyes as a leader, but they have an agenda of some sort and they're going to drive that agenda hard. I would say and I do say to leaders, spend your energy, spend your best thinking on things that are most important. The things that are more routine, you can dispense with quickly. I'm not reading that email, TL2R, too long to read, in the garbage it goes. That's fine. So long as other people in your organization are using meta awareness to interrogate the habits in your organization, the processes in your organization, and help identify the risks of those habits and processes, shall we say Silicon Bank, for example.
What happened there?
I don't know what happened, but one of the things that happens to people when they let habits go on uninterrogated is that success covers a lot of risk factors, and maybe they don't show up right away. I mean, what did Warren Buffett say?
I was just thinking
I know he's swimming naked.
Yeah.
Now, and I want to say that leaders that make these sorts of errors are not necessarily bad, and they're probably not stupid. These are human things that we all do. I just hope that when I make an error of judgment, it's about something that doesn't have a big consequence. But if I'm making a really important decision, like about my investments, for example, and I'm an ex-stockbroker, so this is sort of a nerdy thing that I like to do, that I really want to be tuned in.
Okay. And that's good. So I like the explore this idea of metacognition. How do we acquire it?
We have the capacity for it, which is so cool. Metacognition it's very simple. It means thinking about thinking. And you can use metacognition, and people do this in their companies without labeling it as such, and that's fine. One way is prospectively. So let's think about what we need to do or what decision we need to make. And now let's think about how we're going to think about it. What are the assumptions we're going to make? What are the assumptions that need to be challenged? The second is what is in real time. Like sitting here talking to you is my background processor making some observations. And I'm a clinical psychologist by academic background, so this is sort of second nature for me, but it can be practiced. And the final thing is in retrospect, and this is what postmortems are, is you're looking back at something and trying to understand what happened and why. And I would add to that, really take a look at what are the thought processes that are shared, especially by a senior team? What are the assumptions you have that led you to do A, B, or C? And how is that associated with your outcome?
Very insightful. And the word metacognition is related to, as you as a clinical psychologist and me as not even a student of psychology understands, is realms in the cognitive. So there's something else which drives us human beings. Oh. It's called emotion. Yeah. So how do we divorce it? How do we integrate, or how do we deal with it, Constance?
Yeah. Well, we can't divorce it. And I'll tell you a story about a fellow that I met it was a company that my client had acquired, and I was helping them get the new company up on its feet. And it ended up going really well. But this guy screamed at me one day. He stood up, put his hands on his desk, leaned over, his face was red and he was sweaty. And he said, "We're not irrational."
Oh, that's good.
I can't even remember what provoked it. And he goes, "There is no emotion in our decisions." And I thought, oh, really? Yeah.
That is a great story. I like that. It's almost like the proverbial CEO pounding on the table. We will be creative today.
Right, exactly. It's like when you're a little nervous, maybe you're in a physician's office and they go, "Relax." So the research from neuroscience about emotion is extremely clear. We cannot divorce ourselves from emotion, nor can we separate it from our thinking, but we can become more aware of it. And there's a very positive aspect to this. You know, if you're trying to pivot your company to a new strategy or a new market, you need enthusiasm. That's emotion. That's a positive emotion. Emotion fuels behavior, and for good or ill. And so understanding that as a leader helps you make decisions about how you're going to speak and what decisions you're going to make.
Right. Now you have something which is behavior changes us. Yeah. We might as well be conscious of it. And I'll say, well, duh. So if it's so obvious, why aren't we conscious? And what happens, Constance? So.
Yeah. Well, we're not conscious of our behavior all the time because there's too much that is commanding our attention. And I'm not advocating that people walk around in the world trying to be so bloody self-aware that they bump into trees and stuff. You know, that's
no, you need a cell phone to bump into a tree. So,
but my point is that sometimes the behaviors we engage in are creating. And our behavior, by the way, does change our brain. It changes our neurotransmitters. The brain is actually most accurately thought of as a network. And so this conversation between you and I is altering what's happening in our brains. We're just not conscious of it. And we can't really be conscious of everything. It's not necessary. But sometimes if you're not getting the results you want, if you just look at your behaviors. So when I was a practicing therapist, I could see easily the correlation between people who were very depressed and their thinking and their behavior. Yes. Now, when you're depressed, it's hard to change your behavior because you don't have a lot of energy. But you see these things and simpler things. So for example, you run your own company and you know that some things behaviorally can help you perform better, reach your goals. Like I have these things. These are like miniature legal pads with sticky. I'm not going to move my computer to show you. I have about 18 of these stuck to my desk in different places. Why? Because I've learned that that's a way for my memory to be triggered about things that I want to be paying attention to. Before I did that, I would sometimes sit down at my desk and go, what was I going to do?
Well, I don't know about you, Constance, but for me, it applies to my age. When I go down to the basement, I'll say, why am I here? And it's, and it's not an existential question.
No. No,
So
it's not what's it all about, Alfie. It's like
yeah.
literally, was I coming to
And if
this
you can
show?
remember what's it all about, Elfie, then you're in that area of why am I in the basement?
Right, exactly.
Anyway, so
Exactly.
you talk about a lovely concept, and I'm just putting these two and two together. You're the expert. One of my favorite ideas to explore, just talk about, is and revere, and that's age, I suppose, is age related, I should say, is the concept of wisdom. Is wisdom an uber trait? I never thought of it that way, but is it? So
I think it is.
yeah.
I think it is. I mean, I don't know. I think we have to go back and read Aristotle and people like that. But I think that wisdom doesn't always come from experience, but I would find it hard to believe that one could be wise without some body of experience. And again, I think wisdom is associated with a synthesis of experience and knowledge and self-regulation, which is, again, it's back to my three aspects of meta leadership. It's really about Mark Levy, who's a very well-known positioning expert, asked me, he said, when people read your book, what are you afraid they're going to miss? And I said, the notion of synthesis, that I'm not saying be an eyebrows up person, that you're just so in love with metacognition that that's where you live, or that you're just a foam, like a boiling cauldron of emotion, or that you're so behavioral that you forget about what I'm describing is a synthesis of those three things that really done well enables you to manage, enables you to see through the chaos, see what's real, and make great decisions in just a host of situations.
I think this concept, excellent. A concept of meta leadership is coming to an under exploration when you said, what might people miss? And you talked about the brain being essentially a neural network.
Yeah.
Some of the brightest or most gifted executives I've ever worked with are those who see connections where others do not.
Yes.
I think Rita McGrath talks about this as seeing around corners. Whitney Johnston talks about the S curve and stuff. But people who see disparate things and make the links, that's a meta form of meta analysis, and they translate it to leadership. Would it not be, Constance?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I refer to that as pattern recognition. So you see something, and you see something that on the surface doesn't look the same, or it's unrelated, but you start to put together a pattern. So either things are correlated or they're pieces of a larger puzzle. And you're right. The leaders who can, it's an abstraction capability. It's this more, it's the part of the brain that does more executive functions. And I hate using phrases like it's the part of the brain that, because the brain is not like a bunch of pieces that got glued together. It really is a network. But we do know that it's damage in the frontal lobe causes impairment in judgment.
Right. Well, interesting. Now, drilling down from the abstract to the real, and we opened up with hippopotamus leadership. Excuse me, dichotomous leadership. Shame on me. I've destroyed this.
Funny. It's really funny.
So it's shorthand. It navigates us. But how do we avoid? You have some things, 3 ways to avoid this black and white thinking. What are they, Constance?
Yeah. So one of the ways is to lean back. The advice, the phrase "lean in," and I by the way, I'm not here to criticize Sheryl Sandberg. Leaning in can be an extremely useful thing. So when I say lean out, if you're thinking dichotomously, you're saying, oh, she's saying lean in is bad. I'm not saying that. I'm saying lean in when it's necessary. But when a leader has a very ambiguous situation, there's a lot of information coming at them, there's a lot of people trying to influence them, they can lean back and change where they're standing. Another way to do that is to literally change where you're standing. So a leader who, for example, is in a corporate office, a CEO who's in a corporate office, who doesn't ever go out to the field except for these ceremonial visits, is going to miss some things. I had the great joy to work with 3 successive presidents of the Olive Garden restaurant chain, and every one of them ate in a lot of Olive Garden restaurants. I was with them consuming a lot of pasta and other things because
I couldn't resist.
they were going to jump in and interfere with what they saw happening, but because it told them a lot about the ethos of the company.
I agree 100%. And John Le Carre, in one of his novels, wrote, "A desk is a dangerous place from which to view the world." And, there's the food. You mentioned the food service. I mean, those are some of the most hands-on leaders. And they're great examples of knowing the business, and they're so people focused. So did you notice that when they're up? Yeah,
I did. And interestingly enough, of the 3 presidents, only one of them grew up through operations. And so he had really deep knowledge. His name is Dave Pickens, and I was fortunate enough to write about him in my first book. And Dave was just a beloved leader. He knew a lot about operations. The other 2 came up through marketing. And the way that they earned credibility with the operators, because where do most people in a restaurant company work? In the restaurants, not in the corporate office. Yeah. They spent a lot of time early on in the restaurants talking to people, just being very casual and connecting and making connections. And that really supported them being able to build credibility. And I just love, one of them is Drew Madsen, who by the time he was done with the first month of his presidency, the operators were telling each other, "Have you met him? Oh, you haven't? Oh, he's great." Because he got out from behind the desk, John, just like you said.
Yeah, and now there is where your psychological background, your doctorate, is coming through, and I want you to say why are you called the decision doctor? So.
Oh, yeah. Well, I have a couple nicknames.
Well,
the co-pilot, the flight engineer, Ferrari is a nickname. But I was with a client one day. We were working on a merger that had gone in the ditch. I wasn't there early on. Let me just say,
So it's their fault, not you.
It went in the ditch and was, about to burst into flames. And this guy had gotten my name from someone in his company, and I worked with him, and he was a really good leader. He pulled it out of the ditch. I mean, he did a great job. So all credit to him. And one day we were sitting in his office, and he said, "Do you know what you are?" And I thought, "Oh, uh-oh." And he said, "You're the decision doctor. You help us make the most consequential decisions." And I thought, I better trademark that. And so I did. So I didn't create it for myself. I'm really delighted that was given to me.
Well, I would call that a high mark of esteem. So, there's something in business that maybe you've observed a couple of times. It's called conflict. So how can a meta-analytical approach resolve it or help us deal with it, Constance? So.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the most bad conflicts I was involved in was between a board and a CEO. And that's not an uncommon conflict. And oftentimes I'm advising in those situations. And what led to the conflict was not using meta leadership. There was a rumor about the CEO that got to the board, and they way overreacted. It was extremely messy, very threatening. And I got involved, and I went in calmly to try to figure out what was going on. That's often the referral question I get. It's like, "Would you go over there and tell us what's going on?" Sure. I love doing that. I'm like an amateur anthropologist.
Well, that is jump on that for a second. That's where executive coaches play a role, because we are disinterested. That doesn't mean uninterested, but we're separate. We have a different perspective. We're not caught up in the same axle everyone else is. So your
Exactly.
insights are very
Exactly.
valuable. So.
Right. So I figured out what was going on, what I thought was going on, and I
Mhm.
talked to the chairman, and I talked to the head of the finance committee, and we sorted it out, and they did an emergency meeting with the executive committee in Washington, and we got it sorted out, and they all ended up apologizing to the CEO.
Good. You are a doctor.
They didn't. Yeah. It was, sometimes I sit with my clients and I think I'm really glad I have a doctorate in clinical psych. This is sort of like family therapy or something. Not that I talk that way. So
Yeah.
that was a case of them leaping in, not leaning back, and
Mm.
being very reactive. And in fairness to them, these were all smart people, men. They were all men. That's just a fact.
There might be a problem right there.
Well, no, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying this is a fact. They were all men, and they had some very real fears about if what they had heard was true, it would have been pretty awful. So they got really anxious and trigger
Mhm.
happy, and so that does happen.
No, and that's true. So you have something else, and I hadn't quite framed it here. It's called behavioral data. So what is it? And you say understanding it or utilizing it can help your employees. What do you mean by that, Constance? So
Behavioral data is observable data. And what this is one of our shortcuts we take. We observe somebody doing something and we interpret it and we label it and we dichotomize it as good or bad. So, so and so is late to all the meetings. So let's call him, I was going to say John, but let's call him David. So David is always late to meetings and his boss gets really mad and storms into his office and says, "You are lazy." That's interpreting. The feedback is, I have noticed that you have been late to the last 6 meetings, and that's not okay with me. It's disruptive. And I know that you want to get promoted. And one of the things that will stand in your way is you not showing up on time, which shows respect for your colleagues. And I don't want that for you, and I don't think you want that. So is there something happening that we could talk about? That you're calling out the behavior, you're not accusing them of some that there's something wrong with them because you don't know.
no, and that's true. And I think that the dichotomous thinking would encourage us to leap to conclusions and
Exactly.
also cast aspersions. Not that I've ever done it myself, of
Oh,
course.
no, me either. No, I've never. I mean, that's part of my point is this is a very human tendency. And, when people hear about this idea and they see others do it, the tendency will be to say, well, that's stupid. So, it's human, but
Yeah.
that is not an excuse for being ineffective as a leader.
Well, Constance, we are racing along here
We
much
are.
too quickly. I could go on for a long time with you, but you are a very busy person. So, as we discussed, every guest on the show shares a story about grace. Do you have something you'd like to share with us? So,
I do. And this is grace that was demonstrated by a group of people. Almost none of them do I know, but a mutual friend had a series of unfortunate events. He's actually a pretty well-known podcaster and beloved. And after many months of struggling, he posted and said, "Dear friends, I want to let you know what's happening with my wife and I. She'd been ill." And he said, "We need money." And people started sending him money. And the grace was not just people helping him, but his reaction. He said, "I never understood how important it is to allow people the opportunity to help." And I just thought, oh, Oh, it was just great, and they're doing much better now. In fact, I just was emailing with him.
Oh, that's great. What a wonderful story. And the
Grace all around. Yeah.
grace all around. Yes, the obviously this gentleman had created a bond with his listeners through his podcast, and when he was in a dire need, his guests or his following paid him back, and they felt good about it too. And it's cyclical. So what a wonderful, rich story.
Oh,
Constance, the name of your book is Meta Leadership.
yes.
Um, and do you have a copy of it? You hold it up.
I have
So
a copy right here. I have the, you get a few authors' copies, right?
you should have many.
Back. And I love this. Look at this. This will knock your eyes out.
And Constance, how can people find you? So
They can find me, well, they can find me on LinkedIn. They can find me online. My website is my name, constancedierickx.com.
great.
And when the book will be out on April 18th, and they can go in their local Barnes and Noble, because Barnes and Noble, thank you very much, Barnes and Noble, will have at least one copy in every store. So that's exciting. Also, in independent bookstores, I'll be appearing at Fountain Books in Richmond, Virginia on April 18th. So anyone who's in the area and wants to come by, I'd love to see you.
Constance, that's wonderful. Great. And we will put your website in the notes so everybody can follow it. It has been, it's such a pleasure to have you. And thank you. And with that, we'll go out.
Thank you, John.